What is going on, guys? MMA Island team. We got the fight picks, and we got the fill-in Kevin Natividad taking on Brian Kelleher. Obviously, Brian Kelleher was supposed to fight Ricky Simone. Ricky Simone's cornerman tested positive for COVID. Man, the stage the world is in right now. Think of all the fights we could have had.
Crazy.
Crazy. But we got Natividad getting his UFC debut coming from LFA. Really, really interesting to talk about Natividad here. So I'll start off by talking about him. So he's got a KO victory in his last one, a split decision win in his last one, and a decision win in that one, TKO, and then a KO loss. So his only loss comes by KO in 2017. So he bounced back pretty well after that with three victories in 2018, one victory in 2019 by split decision against a guy who's currently 10-8. And then he gets a KO victory, 2 months ago now? I guess you could say last month because it's early September. So
Yeah.
talking about Brian Kelleher now, obviously he's had his loss coming up against Cody Stamann, and then had the KO victory over Hunter Azure, who's also on this card. And then O'Day Osborne, the guillotine choke, man, he looked to be on a run before that Cody Stamann fight. I picked Cody Stamann to beat Brian Kelleher in this one. And I think I'm picking Natividad to beat Brian Kelleher in this one. Not really confident in this one, but also not very common. You hear this one as well. A lot of people are picking Kelleher in this one. Just there's a couple reasons that I'm going with Natividad here. First of all, is you're looking at a guy who doesn't have a crazy amount of experience. So he's currently sitting at 9-1, but he's a taller guy. The same height. So it's not a taller guy. I don't know where I saw that, but so they're the same height. They're both typically strikers. Brian Kelleher obviously has a very good guillotine choke. And he is pretty good on the ground as well outside of the guillotine choke. He tried to bring it to the ground. And then honestly, man, this is a really interesting matchup, as I mentioned. I honestly think Natividad is going to go out there and point fight and kind of play a decent game. And what we've seen out of Brian Kelleher in his last few fights is that the striking, the power is one thing that he likes to rely on. But having a guy in Natividad who's got that power, I think that he's going to be able to win the striking exchanges and also kind of keep it away from the ground. I don't think Natividad's going to shoot on Brian Kelleher. So I don't think that guillotine is going to play any sort of factor. Obviously, you can get a guillotine outside of the other person shooting on you, but I don't think the ground game is going to play a factor because I think this fight stays standing. And I think Natividad is going to be able to outpoint Brian Kelleher. Like I mentioned, it's not crazy confidence, but I do think that Kelleher's been, as we mentioned before, in the Hunter Azure pick, Hunter Azure was outpointing Brian Kelleher pretty badly before the knockout. And as I mentioned in that one, and I'll mention it again, we're not taking away anything from Kelleher. He had the KO victory. But just from what I've seen, out of his last, I'd say, 5 fights, I would say that we haven't really seen so much striking at a Kelleher outside of the knockout of Azure. And I honestly think that's not the case with Natividad. Out of his 10 fights, we've seen most of them be pretty good at a striking outside of obviously the KO loss, which is in 9 seconds, crazily. So I don't know, man. I got to go with the underdog in this one. I think him coming into this one, short notice, a little bit less of short notice than most people do because the Simone fight fell out, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. About a week and a half.
He has a little bit more time than I would say, what's his name? Austin Springer did.
Brutal.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. I just think that Kelleher wins this fight. It's most likely going to have to be by knockout, unless you can get the guillotine choke or implement the ground game somehow. But man, I honestly think that Natividad is going to be able to point him. I think this dude's a hard guy to finish. He's got power. He's got very slick striking. He looks to have a pretty high fight IQ. So it's, as I mentioned multiple times, not a very high confidence pick, but at the same point in time, we don't know too much about these guys. So when these guys step in, we can't really have too high confidence on either side. Just because this guy could be a killer for all we know because he's coming in short notice, or he could be terrible and he could get knocked out in 10 seconds by Brian Kelleher. We have no clue. So I'll take the risk. I like the risk in this one. I think Natividad, from what I've seen out of him, he's a high IQ fighter. He's got power. And I just think the point fighting battles, I think he'll win every single one with Brian Kelleher outside of pure power and pure well-roundedness, I think Brian Kelleher, you would give the advantage on the ground. But as I mentioned multiple times, I don't think it's going to go to the ground. So I'll take Natividad in a point fight battle, and I'll take him by decision.
Let me just say this. I tried to find every single opportunity to pick Kevin Natividad because I wanted to. I really, really wanted to. And this is because I was mentioning to Michael earlier that Brian Kelleher is one of my favorite fades in the UFC. I love to pick against him. But this time, I just can't do it. Now, I'm not discrediting Kevin Natividad in the slightest. When I watched him fight Kyle Estrada in LFA, what I noticed is that his hands are sharp as hell. They are very fast, and they find their targets. This guy's striking is very, very good. It's just the thing for me is that this is such a huge step up for him. Kyle Estrada was probably the best fighter that Kevin Natividad has faced by a decent margin. And Kyle Estrada, we know, loses to these fringe UFC contenders. I mean, we saw what he did with Adrian Yanez, one of my absolute favorite fighters ever. You know, if you don't know why, he's because he was the person who got me here pretty much. First interview I ever did. But that's getting besides the point. Now, why do I think Brian Kelleher is going to win this fight? Well, I think that the volume striking game of Natividad, yes, Kelleher is hittable, but I still think that he's going to have better striking defense than almost anyone he has faced because you look at these guys that he's getting hit by. You know, Cody Stamann, Hunter Azure, Montel Jackson, John Lineker, Renan Barao, Cheeto Vera. These guys are some of the most dynamic strikers in the entire UFC. And looking at that, you can really value that. And I do believe that his striking defense, once Natividad gets a lot of his shots blocked, then he's going to try for his wrestling because that's another thing that he does. He does like to wrestle, training out of a good gym in Arizona Combat Sports. But we know what Kelleher likes to do. First of all, his takedown defense is absolutely impeccable. And I do value Kelleher's gas tank over the gas tank of Kevin Natividad. He was starting to slow down. I've seen him slow down a little bit before, and taking this fight on short notice, he hasn't had this time to really prepare his gas tank. Kelleher's been training for a guy who will definitely test your gas tank in Ricky Simone with the pace that he likes to push. So Kelleher's going to be ready to fight for 3 rounds. And I think that Kevin Natividad will have some success in this fight because I think he's very talented. But I think Kelleher is going to take over. And if Kelleher wants to shoot for the takedown, he's going to get it. That's the thing. If he wants to take this fight to the ground and get a submission, he absolutely can. So, again, I want to pick Kevin Natividad. Again, if Kevin Natividad wins, I'm not going to be surprised because I don't believe that highly in Brian Kelleher. And that's why I don't like making this pick. But I have to go with my brain. Because when my brain and my gut disagree, I always go with my gut, and my brain's the one who's right. So this time, I'm not going to listen to my gut. I'm not going to pick Natividad. I'm going to go Kelleher, and I'm going to say submission.
Yeah, I definitely can't fault you for it. One thing we mentioned before we started recording is how crazy the line is on this one. I think it's
too wide
multiplier towards Natividad. Albeit not crazy confidence from my side with Natividad. I would not be shocked if Kelleher goes out and wins this one. As I mentioned, it's mostly just the we don't know factor. And if you guys are going to say we don't know, go back and look at some of these short fill-in fights, the guys who are debuting especially. Guys have came out there and just absolutely destroyed people who just totally rid off.
Justin James
won me $10. But talking about this one, man, it's a really, really interesting matchup. This card is filled with interesting matchups. I tend to throw that phrase around a lot, but as we mentioned, we got a disagreement in this one as well. So we got to have you guys break the tie. Not really high confidence from either side. So I want to see if you guys can put a better case than both of us in this one. Drop your comments. Let us know. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Check out the other Fight Pick videos.